Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. We're here helping you sort through any kind of, I don't know, struggle that you might have in your inner life. We're hoping to help build your skill level so that you can look inward and feel like you can handle whatever's coming up. I don't know, Laurel. I think we've challenged ourselves to that, don't you?
I do. And this month in particular, month of March, where we are focusing on communication. It really, I mean, this is one of the things I can say. I've worked in corporate communications in my professional life. Communication was a big part of my training and the work I did every day, but it is a never-ending skill building area for me in my personal and professional life, I'm going to say.
Yeah,
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 there's
I know.
always room to improve my communication. So
I feel like always, I feel that way too, Laurel. I feel like communication, for every human being who's alive is a work in progress until you take your last breath, literally.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting as you say that, that makes me think about the world we live in and the expectation of, I'll say our community, right? Our society, the expectation of how we communicate, why we communicate, to whom do we communicate. Like that is also changing.
Yeah.
And so when we're not paying attention to, maybe I'm going to say social norm, although I'm not advising that everybody be a conformist. Please do
Mm.
not think that I'm saying that. But, being respectful and knowing the social norm just so that you know how to move through the world respecting other people is so
Yeah.
important. And communication, we trip up on that sometimes.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that, I find that with particularly clients, that are, let's say, my generation, our generation, a little bit older, those clients, if you aren't willing to accept that the norms change, the culture changes, we evolve, we grow, and it's not going to be like it used to be all the time, you can get really frustrated and really down on life. And so the solution to that is just realize you have to keep going, keep forging forward and challenging yourself, to communicate well. And
Yes.
yeah, and just do the best you can, really, truly.
Yeah.
So today, ooh, today's topic. Ah,
I can't wait till you tell us.
I know. I know. All right. Let's all do this collectively together, okay? Because this is one that needs a big breath. How to give feedback without criticism. It's hard to give feedback, isn't it, Laurel?
It is hard to
To
give
do it
feedback.
well. To do
Yeah.
it well. Yeah.
And can we broaden it just a tiny bit
Yeah.
of how to receive feedback without taking it as criticism,
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
right? Because we we want to give feedback and sometimes we want to receive feedback, but it's difficult no matter what side of it, whether you're the giver or the receiver.
I agree. I agree. And I know for me, as a sensitive type, which I've talked about a lot on here, but it's my reality. And a lot of the reality around people that I'm around, is that there are more sensitive people in the world than we might think there are. It's hard. It hurts to be criticized. Doesn't feel good. And sometimes that can shut us down or make us angry or cause us to have, all kinds of bad thoughts about ourselves or others. And that's not going to help the situation. So the goal here in our show, hopefully, is to explore, for us and for you, ways of sharing your thoughts and your feelings and your ideas where you feel like you can give some feedback, but you're not delivering a dose of criticism with it, and it's hopefully not being received that way as well. Yeah.
You know, one of the things I have learned, and my children, my greatest teachers, of course,
Mm,
um, this lesson came through them, right?
mhm.
In their young adulthood, when they were away in college, I had to really ask them, right? I think I've shared this before. They would call, they were both in Pennsylvania, 8 to 12 hours from home, and they'd call and be telling me something.
Mm.
Often it was something that was challenging them or a problem they were having. And I had to really, before I gave them feedback, before I found myself criticizing whether it be the situation that they were in or how they were handling a situation. I had to learn to ask for clarification on my role because sometimes I think that we, if we assume our role is to be that of the critic,
Mm-hmm.
right? That of the judge, that of the decider,
Or the
whatever
advice
role,
giver,
the
right?
advice
Like we were
giver,
talking
oh,
about in the previous show.
the
Yep.
the fixer, the
Yep.
problem solver,
Yep.
right? If those are my tendencies, the roles I typically take on without even being aware of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can
Yep.
laugh at that because it sounds funny, but that happens. Um, then I walk right in to a place
Yeah.
where I'm not invited,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so asking, and I'm going to say maybe even the first step is being curious. What is my role in this conversation? And asking what role the other is looking for you to play or what they need from you,
Yeah.
how you
Yeah.
can best help them.
It's perfect. And I think, it's so simple too. And if you don't not sure how to do that, as soon as a person starts talking and and you can say, hold on, hold on. Do you want me to just listen? Or did you want me to actually do something? I mean, what's going to help you in this conversation? What are you looking for from me? Right. Any of
Yes.
those kinds of lines or questions is a way to, allow the other person some space both to talk and to think about or to start to acknowledge what kind of support they're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes they're not. I mean, how often do we give advice or feedback without asking permission to do so, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I rarely say, would you like my advice?
Yeah.
I rarely say that,
I
even
know.
though I probably should. Um,
Mm,
and so it really is a new skill as we're
right.
talking about communication and, up leveling our skills here.
Yeah.
Imagine if we were raised and grew up, being taught to ask permission before we just jump in.
So good. So good. Laurel, I want to mention another resource for our listeners today because it's really coming up really strongly as I'm listening to you. And I think it will help anybody who really is interested in this topic and diving deeply into it and getting a really strong, strong skill set in communications. I loved this book. It was a book that I learned about and was referred to when I did my peer leadership training all those many years ago at the Women's Center. And it's the name of the book is Will the Real Me Please Stand Up? And the author is, let me put my glasses on so I can read it for our people here, John Powell. And in the book, he shares 25 communication guidelines, which I actually have right in front of me right now. I'm just gonna talk about a couple of them. I'm just gonna share a couple of them here. It's a very different book. It's not like the book I referred to in our last show, the Difficult Conversations book, which was very academic and very research based and data based. This is one that was written by a man who actually, I believe he was raised by his stepmother. His story is in there. And he and his brother were really mistreated by this woman. And he was really wounded and traumatized in a lot of ways. And over time, he went through his own healing process and began to write about his experience and then also write about the kind of communication that was very healing for him. And we refer to this writing in our peer leadership training. It's one that I've used and, with clients along the way at different times, depending on where their communication, difficulties were. But it's very, very different. And I'm just going to read a few of those guidelines that he offers up, right, as examples. And we can talk about them a little bit and just kind of make note that this is a very different way of thinking about coming into communication with other people.
You've piqued my interest.
I know, right? Okay. So one of them is a relentless honesty with ourselves. That's one of the guidelines, okay, that we would follow. That would be encouraging. A relentless honesty first with ourselves. Never mind with the other person, right? First with ourselves. Love that. A willingness to share our own vulnerability. A lot of times we go into a conversation and we're ready to talk about somebody else's vulnerability, but not necessarily our own, right? So yeah,
Oh, yeah.
a willingness to go there, right? An explicit expression of thanks to those who have trusted us enough to share with us, like really taking the time to thank somebody for sharing their inner experience with us. How often do we do that?
Not
Right.
enough.
Not enough. Yeah. Maybe one more. Admitting our failures and apologizing to those we have hurt.
Yeah.
Right. Oftentimes, I think we kind of know when we've hurt somebody, but we don't necessarily have the courage to like go right in there and say, wow, did I just do something? I think I just did something that might have been hurtful. Yeah. And I'm sorry if I did. Can we talk about it? Right. I think that, one of the things I loved about this book so much was it challenged me to think about my communication in new ways. And it challenged me to, um, take that first one, right? This, a relentless honesty with ourselves really seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is really big.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yes. When I think about that, often we are more able and willing to communicate about someone else's situation, problems, whatever it is that needs fixing. Right? If we were to stop and think about relentless honesty with myself before I could communicate, that might keep me quiet for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. And also might just make you look at things differently. Like think about, you and I have talked about, you know, uh, having perfectionist tendencies, right? And how they get in the way of how we can enjoy life and how we both have suffered from those tendencies. And I think that if I applied just this one guideline that we're talking about, a relentless honesty with ourselves, um, when we're in the pursuit of perfection, right? It's kind of it's almost a fruitless endeavor to a certain extent. Um, and if we're really truly honest with ourselves, we'll acknowledge we're not perfect. We're never going to be absolutely perfect. And the things that we do might seem really good to us or might be great, but what is perfect, really? It's a construct that we're making of our own, I don't know,
Yes.
mind. Yeah.
Yes. And it's interesting because then, just taking that example of perfectionism, right?
Yeah.
Being honest with yourself about where the need stems from, right? And really, honestly looking at myself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably been since in the last few years since we've been doing this podcast together, really looking at if everything comes from either love or fear, right? Which one? How can I honestly look at myself and be communicating with love to someone else if what my tendency is grounded in something other than love or fear, right?
Right, right. And that
You
comes
know?
back to that criticism, right?
Yeah,
Which is really the topic of our show and kind of
yeah,
leads in nicely here is that whole idea of, when we're stuck in perfectionism, we're usually stuck in a loop of self-criticism,
yeah,
don't you think?
yes. And
Because
when
we're never going to be perfect.
right, and when we are stuck in a loop of, self-criticism,
Yeah.
it's so easy to bring criticism you know, into our external, into our other relationships, into the world, right?
Yeah.
We really do find much more room for criticism when we hold it within ourselves. So I think that's so important.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I feel like at some level, you know, it's kind of the built-in remedy, shall we say, for this idea of offering feedback without criticism, right? Is to begin to do the work of cleaning up our own self-criticism and cleaning up our own inner dialogue, right? So that we're just noticing what we're doing, not necessarily criticizing every move we make or every place that we fall short, but just noticing it, acknowledging it, and then saying, how do we want to do it differently going forward? Right. And I
Yes.
think ultimately, isn't that kind of the way to give feedback without criticism is just acknowledging what we're doing, what we each did, and wondering how can we do it differently? and then making some sort of agreement or, you know, plan to do it differently going forward, right? We can do
And
better. Yeah.
we can. And as you were talking, what was really coming through for me was this assumption that we make that feedback, maybe I'm the only one that makes this assumption, but when someone asks me for feedback or when I'm, you know, giving feedback, welcome or not, um, it really is a fix, right? It's feedback that is going to correct a situation or change a situation for the better. And of course, I'm the one who decides the better, right?
Yeah.
And so when I think about what if feedback was not fixing or a solution? What if it really was as easy as witnessing,
Yeah.
right? Holding when someone is
Mm,
um, bringing something to you
mm.
to share with you, right? Maybe they really just need someone to witness them. Maybe they don't need it fixed.
I love that. I'm thinking about an example from my own life that I want to share here. Um, and for for me, it's been really hard to talk about things that I feel that are really painful for me, right? And part of it is, um, kind of my long-standing wiring of protecting myself, feeling vulnerable, that real deep sensitivity, not wanting to be hurt more. So for me to share something that I find painful, right? Um, it's just hard, because I don't want more pain and I don't want to cause a problem by even talking about what somebody else did that might inadvertently have hurt me, right? So the other night I wanted to share something with my husband that he had said that was really hard for me. And he was speaking in a we kind of term, right? And I didn't feel the way that he felt about it. And what he was saying was really positive, but in the statement, he was leaving out a part of the experience that was a reality for me, but not for him. And I wanted to talk to him about it, but didn't do it because I didn't want to feel like I was blaming him for anything or criticizing him or, like any of the things that we're talking about here. Right. But I realized that I was holding it and it was painful to hold without sharing that it had hurt me. Right. And it was just more painful to hold it than to not just go ahead and say it and let it land. Right.
Yeah.
And so when I did it, the first thing I said was, I don't want this to be a big thing for us because it's not necessarily a big thing. It's just a thing that I experienced that I want you to know about. And I didn't know how else to say it ultimately because I didn't want him to feel blamed. I didn't want him to, didn't have to go into a lengthy conversation about how to do it differently or because he's really careful about how he speaks. I'm very careful about how I speak. We love each other. We don't want to hurt each other. So it wasn't about that. It was just about me sharing something that hurt. And that's really it's a whole different way of going into communication, right, Laurel?
It
Yeah.
really is. And you know what I love about that? You you clarified his role right from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You freed him from having to defend himself or to explain or to apologize, right? It
Yeah.
just you clarified the role
Right.
very
Right.
quickly.
Yeah. And it wasn't, I mean, we did talk about it a little bit more than we necessarily needed to, but that's because I think both of us want to be careful, not to hurt each other or not to take it to a place where we don't want it to go. But we still talked about it a little bit. And I felt like we did really well. Right. But we were also really, really careful, to not criticize one another. And I feel like that's really, as we talk about this topic today, and we're exploring it, is this idea of there's no one right way necessarily to offer feedback or to give feedback without it feeling like criticism, but
Yeah.
you really want to have that intention held really strongly in you, right?
Yes.
So that your
Yeah.
language aligns with that. Yeah, and you do the best you can. Yeah.
And it is true that when you say it's something you experienced that he didn't necessarily, or so, as he speaking in the we term was was relaying a situation, but didn't capture your experience in it,
Yeah.
right? That there's no fault in that. Often, each individual has their own experience in the same situation. And so I think this is a really good example of how you provided feedback without the criticism, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And it just seems like if we can learn to do more of that, and it took courage, as you said, it wasn't easy to do that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and we'll come back to another guideline because this is one of the things that, when we talk about these group guidelines that we use, one of the other guidelines is to speak in I statements, right? Not you statements or we statements, but I statements. And the reason that we do that is we're owning how we feel, we're owning our own thoughts, we're owning our own opinions. It's a very empowering place to be so that when you say we, you aren't including somebody necessarily when that might not be their experience, or they might not have the same opinion, they might not have the same feelings that you have about something, right? And so this idea of speaking in I statements is something that, for me, like I really took that to heart as well as part of our guidelines, and got to the place where I spoke a lot in I statements. And then when you're in coupledom and you want to talk about our house or we did this or we did that, it's sometimes that language, then I know it tripped me up for a while. It's like, yeah, I am a couple and I am a we at times, but I'm still a me. How do I do this well, Yeah.
Well, and I think the I statements are so very powerful
Mm.
because it really does have each individual exploring and owning,
Yeah.
what I feel, what I see, what I experience. And just by bringing it in to the individual, it frees others from having to be a part of that or agree with that or take it on as their own, right?
Right.
Um, and I do think, in the world we live in right now, there's a lot of separateness and a lot of people feel separate from others,
Mm.
right? And in my experience in the last recent past, in the last year or two, I find that we language really does keep us feeling separate,
Yeah.
right?
It
So the
can. Yeah.
more that I can speak with in the I language and express what I need and why, what
Yeah.
I value. I mean, I think it almost feels speaking in I really does feel vulnerable because it exposes,
Mm.
just me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it comes back to taking responsibility. Like I'm just talking about how I feel and what I
Yeah.
think. And it's easy to water that down, or it doesn't feel as responsible or as vulnerable, right? To say we, because
Yeah.
you're kind of in with the collective, you're in with the group, right? Yeah.
Right. You've got a whole army behind you.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Um,
so Laurel, as we explore this idea of offering feedback without criticism, or taking it as criticism, I feel like this is so there's so much subtlety and then so many avenues and places to go. So I know we're going to talk a little bit more, but I just want to remind our listeners that I want to invite you into making this a longer exploration than just our 30-minute podcast here, because there's a lot to
Absolutely.
this. Yeah.
I was thinking we could do an entire episode just on criticism,
Oh, I
right?
know. I
And
know.
kind of,
Well, yeah, yeah, go ahead. Go
I was going
ahead.
to say, just unravel some of that, right?
Right.
Because I do think as we bring our own self-awareness to our behaviors, tendencies, right, our way of being, and as we try to change some of those things, like as I focus on providing feedback without criticism, I need to deepen into my own, I need to unravel criticism and what that is and how I use it and how it protects me. right?
That's great. That's great. I love
And
that.
so I do think that this topic, we're touching the surface of,
Yes.
the tips of, ask permission or look for clarity of your role, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
those are easy things.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think those are things we can do as we continue to explore our deepest, what's at that root there?
Yeah.
Why do we feel compelled to have feedback coming in the form of criticism?
Yeah. Well, I know, I think I'm going to talk, I'm just going to give my thoughts on that a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
please do.
yeah, one of the things that comes up for me is, just thinking back to, again, my peer leadership training. And, one of the things that we talked a lot about was the idea that criticism is not useful. There's actually nothing useful in criticism. And you can yay or nay that however you want to, but if you really start to explore it in its depths and in its nuances, criticism to me ultimately is meant to shape people's behavior from the outside in, right?
Hmm.
And so self-criticism does that as well, but it it's kind of the same thing where the criticism is usually based on something outside yourself. So you're bringing some outside measurement or evaluation into your experience and applying it to yourself. Where the opposite of that, or the difference in a spiritual path to me is you reconcile with yourself, in a moment to moment, day to day, event to event kind of situation. Did I do my best? Did I show up the way I want to show up? Can I do better than that? What if I did do it differently, or what would feel better to me? What would that look like? You know, without saying, "Oh, you really stunk." Like how you did that just really was terrible, and I'm going to tell you why, right? You didn't do this and you didn't do whatever. However, I mean, criticism just feels terrible. There's nothing good about it. And you can call yourself out and improve your behavior, I think, without necessarily applying a lot of self-criticism. So
Yes.
here's my thoughts.
Well, and it
Yeah.
it just reminded me that what the question of how does it keep me safe?
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
I love that you asked that.
I mean, I do believe when we provide criticism, we do it only to keep ourselves, we do it to keep ourselves safe. It is self-serving in some way, and
Right.
we might not even know what that is yet, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and I also think that, for a minute, let's talk about receiving feedback and
Mhm.
when we interpret the feedback as criticism, right?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what what perspective, what color glasses are we wearing when we receive feedback,
Yeah.
even if it's uninvited? I mean, I know I've had times where I have had uninvited feedback that has been a godsend.
Mm, mm,
There are other times where it really can take me down at my knees, right?
yeah. Right.
And so some of that, my ability to receive and to hear and to filter, because I can receive feedback, but if I'm incapable of filtering it and knowing if it's for me or not,
Mm,
right? It just creates all of the things,
yeah.
insecurity or anger or, that kind of thing. But if I can experience it and then filter it and try to get to a point where does it serve me? Does it not serve me? Am I going to accept it or not?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't stop someone from giving it to you,
Right.
but you can figure out what to do with it
Yes.
in a
Yes.
way to serve yourself.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. And I think there's some level of self-care involved in how to take care of yourself after receiving criticism from somebody. If you're a really sensitive person, I know, like myself, right? I could go in a and sit in my chair and cry for a while just because it could hurt so badly. Right. And I need to get that out. And then I need to sit and be honest with myself about how do I really feel about what they said? Right. Do I agree with it? Do I disagree with it? Do I feel like, there's something in there where my behavior did fall short and so I could do it differently? I mean, I know, and I'll come back to this, our peer model, right? Is when you're a peer leader, you have another somebody who's been trained in peer leadership who is your co-leader, and they aren't leading, but they're there for you before and after. And the goal of their process and their role is to ask you how you're feeling. Are you feeling ready? Is there anything you're anxious about? Like, just talk to me about what's going on for you, right? So you have a place to discharge how you're feeling and just explore that a little bit. And then afterwards, their role is to tell you what they really liked about your leadership, what they really enjoyed about it. So it's their opinion and their experience that was positive about what you did. And then for them to ask you how was it for you, right? How did you experience it? And so the goal here, right, is to strengthen through what we did well and to let ourselves self-identify where we want to do better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, I just merged the two examples you gave us, right?
Yeah.
So, you as a sensitive person, when you get feedback, it may end up having you in a situation where you cry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one, I'm going to say that is the best thing in the world because you can then just release the energy of
Right.
whatever so you don't carry it.
Right.
But could you imagine when you could ask yourself those questions that your peer leader is asking?
Yes, exactly.
How do you feel about what you just heard?
Yeah.
Right? You
Right.
know, how was that experience for you? Right? And I love those questions because you know, you could really admit to yourself, I feel hurt. I
Yeah.
feel attacked. I feel whatever that is. And then the question of, how did I experience it, is a whole different answer, right?
Right.
I
Right.
experienced it, you know, in a way that made me realize how human I am, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many ways that just bringing the awareness with some good questions to ourselves, because I do think when we experience feedback, we tend to go really deep into the insecurity piece of it,
Yeah.
right? And we judge how we're feeling. Where in the example that you gave with your peer leader,
Right.
you're offering how you felt without the judgment. It's just what
Right.
it is.
Right, right. And interestingly, part of what this process does for us is help us begin to break down, the inner critic and the inner judge.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you've read the Four Agreements, which we've referred to many a times here in the podcast because it's such a wonderful book, that's one of the big things in the book, is that you make an agreement literally not to, let's say, commune with your inner critic and your inner judge any longer. And you learn to
Right.
tell them, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I've got it covered here. I can look at myself and reflect on my behavior and decide where I could do better, right? Which is always do your best, one of the agreements. Yeah. I'll give it a go next time. Yeah.
So good.
So good. Yeah. So, Laura, a lot here in this episode for our friends and listeners out there. We're going to wrap up here, but you know that we'll be back to talk about this one again because so many open-ended places and so much to explore here, I think, in our beautiful work, don't you?
I do. This one is a deep, deep topic.
Yeah. Yeah. We'd love to hear how it landed with you, everybody. So feel free to reach out, let us know. And if you have questions from this or you have more from this topic that you'd like us to explore in more depth before the season is over, do let us know because we will come back and hit on that. Yeah,
Yes, we would love your feedback.
we would. Okay. Well,
See you next week, Laurel.
I'll see you next time, Laurel. Thanks again
Bye,
for a great
listeners.
conversation. Bye, everybody.
Bye.